I've been going through a vitriol's been a really interesting journey for me personally, because it's always been like an engine of reaching spiritually, intellectually, even when I didn't really know that was the motive. That's what I was doing. I was trying. It was a method of self-actualizing.
Hmm.
And for instance, I never really knew. Um, I never really knew that my never knew what the source was for this enduring fascination with, let's just say, the devil, right? Like
Hmm.
this idea, this concept. Just kind of took it for granted. I'm like, it's metal, it's whatever. Kind of grew up around it. I think I told you, I mentioned in our last one that my mom practiced witchcraft.
You did,
Uh,
yes.
yeah, so coming up around that stuff. Uh, and I actually made, oh my God, I think this is a really cool thing to share with you.
Go
Um,
ahead.
since last we spoke, I've peeled a little bit back more at that layer. My sister did that ancestry.com thing, and she discovered uh, it's wild shit. I don't know if you know much about like the history of American witchcraft or anything like colonial witchcraft in the United States, but there was in the famous Salem witch trials.
Hmm.
Have you heard of the Salem witch trials?
I have indeed, yes.
Yeah, there was 20 witches, alleged witches burned. Um, one of the first three was named Rebecca Nurse. One of the last ones was named Mary Nurse. Rebecca Nurse was kind of a bit one of the more important figures because she was the oldest woman. She was like 70 when they hung her in her late 60s or something. So it was pretty controversial. I discovered that Rebecca Nurse is my ninth grandmother.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is fucking pretty wild. Mary Nurse is my ninth aunt, and uh,
Something
yeah,
even about the name Rebecca Nurse, it just feels weird, right?
uh, in what way?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I wish I could tell you.
yeah. Uh, so I'm not saying that this, and it gets weirder even. So
Okay.
this is on my mother's side. Okay. Um, that the nurse is direct descendants from the nurses. On my mother's father's side, are you familiar with that movie, The Conjuring?
I am, yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay. So the malevolent spirit that that is responsible for the haunting in The Conjuring, her name is Bathsheba Sherman.
Mhm.
Uh, that's my sixth grandmother. She's a
What is going
real,
on, Kyle?
I don't know, she's a real person. I didn't know this. She's a
Wow.
real person that uh, some aspects of the movie are incorrect. She didn't actually live in the house. She lived on a in an auxiliary house on the property. But she was, and this is all documented. You can look this up. She was accused of murdering children in the neighborhood, and was caught by her husband murdering their own baby in a satanic sacrifice. He said he actually heard her literally sacrificing a child to the devil and then killed him by stabbing him in the head with a knitting needle. And
Fuck.
why it's such a compelling story is that one of the young children that was found dead in the neighborhood had a small puncture wound in his head that was consistent with a metal knitting needle. So, um, and her family Bathsheba came from when her family immigrated from Europe. they settled in a place called the Bridgewater Triangle, which is an area in the United States that's a hotbed for supernatural activity. And at the heart of the Bridgewater Triangle is a swamp. I can't remember the name of it, but they just called it the Black Swamp back then, of course. And they lived there right on that swamp, like literally like on the shore of that swamp for 8 generations before she moved to the Conjuring House and all that shit happened. And what's trippy about the Nurse family on the other side is that, the popular consensus, at least here in the States, is that the Salem witch trials was the result of mass hysteria, that all of these people were just victims of a zealous, paranoid, overly religious population. But what's interesting is, based on my sister's research on Ancestry.com, there's actually documents that show that the Nurse family immigrated from Europe to the States, fleeing from allegations of similarly occult activity. And there's like written accounts of them from like young girls, like describing the nurses like scrying. Like they wouldn't know what scrying was. I don't think that was like popular knowledge back then. But like when they were interviewing little neighborhood girls that would like play with the family, they would describe what they were doing. And it's like, it's hard to make that shit up. So it's interesting for me, beyond it being just like a personal like curiosity, it definitely piqued to curiosity. Like, what are the odds that my mother was a direct descendant from witches that were executed and found witchcraft on her own? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying it's impossible that it's a coincidence, but
yeah, of course, because your mother won't have known any of this information.
Would have known. No, she didn't know. She had no fucking idea. So there's a lot of explanation. It could be a psychological disposition. Doesn't necessarily have to be mystical. Whatever. I'm not making any assumptions, but what I am saying is it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. And I've been asking more questions about that. And through that, I felt much more connected to, what's really interesting. The song, our breakout song, it was called "The Parting of a Neck." Yeah. And I come straight from a direct descendant of a woman that was hung for witchcraft. And the line is, "The noose that they gave me, you can hear it unfurl. The parting of a neck is deafening." So it's like,
fuck.
I don't even know why I wrote that. I have no idea.
You will have obviously written that way before you knew any of this information.
Oh, way before that. So, and all these ideas of like this animosity toward religion, this animosity toward this kind of like unexplained animosity toward Judeo-Christian religion. It's interesting. It's without getting too wooey, it kind of feels like I'm an echo of that experience. Of like, there's a line in the new album: "So let vengeance boil and dispel grace's absolving mire. Like forgiveness will not make of it a silent martyr." It's just kind of like this enduring retaliation. Is kind of almost what it feels like, because I think you don't have to be too out in the weeds and the woo to think of those things. I mean, there's biological evidence showing that certain emotional aspects are heritable. You know what I mean? Like we pass things on. Stress, that's just carried in the body. You know what I mean? Like, things get experiences. I don't know. I believe that, at least.
Think of it like this. This is. I mean, first of all, this is fucking wild. That is really interesting, and I thank you for sharing that with us.
You're the first person outside of my main circle that knows that about me.
I
So
feel honored, man. That's really, really fascinating, and it's grim, but it's kind of cool at the same time.
uh,
Imagine,
I
yeah.
feel very I feel very. I don't feel. I feel reinvigorated in my purpose. It feels. It feels really real in a way that is. Yeah, I just feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Hmm. Well, the way I look at it is, let's break this down and try and understand it at least as best as we can. One is if you want to look at purely the physical, meaning the third dimensional aspect of it, the way I think about it is that just semen in itself is data, right?
Yeah.
So when you're procreating, you're copy and pasting data, and that's data that's formed within your DNA. And the thing that I always say to people is consider the fact that you've never actually died because you're officially semen that's carried all the way since the very beginning of life. And yes, there are many who have died before you, but they still passed you on to be where you are at now.
Yeah.
So you've never officially experienced death. Maybe there's the ego death, whatever, but physically you've never died. Now, with that in mind, you think of the fucking trauma and the weird shit that exists in all of us, right?
Hmm.
And I think that just because we as humans have evolved, I don't think that not only it means there's less of that, if anything, there's more of it. And that's probably yeah, and that's probably why there's weird shit that we all have. Like for example, one example that I make, which interestingly enough, some friends agree and then some others don't, which in itself is thought provoking. But like for example, if you're in the shower and you're washing your face, you immediately want to clear your eyes out so you can open your eyes so you don't get attacked, even though you're just in the bathroom on your own, right? So
Yeah.
it's like these things you think of like, well, which part of our brains brought this on, or thinking that there's monsters under the bed? That's probably just you years and years ago, I don't know, being scared of like bears or lions and shit that could have actually attacked you and killed your whole family at that time. So now you want to bring that into this particular case. If you want to look at it purely in a physical dimension, you could, like you said, it could be like maybe some kind of like a behavioral disposition or like a mental thing that made you want to go towards those other things. But also, if I may say, if you want to look at the metaphysical, which you put it very well, you said you view that in a humble sense. You could look at that as every time you procreate, you pass on a part of your soul. And then, and to me, the idea that like our ancestors are always with us is a powerful and a beautiful thing, and actually something that I strongly believe in
Oh
for,
yeah.
yeah, for various reasons. I don't ever feel like we're alone, despite of where your physical location is. That's irrelevant. They're always with us in a maybe a different layer of reality that you can't just see with your naked eye. Sometimes people report seeing orbs and things like that, and who knows, maybe that's what that is. But I've had too many experiences to ignore these things. But again, that's me personally. I'm humble about it, just as you said you are. But it does make you really think, and it also makes you think that how much of the emotions that you carry with yourself on a day-to-day basis are even your own and not something
Yeah.
that's passed down.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's something that's really humbling about that experience. Um, is feeling like you are at once radically individual and just an accumulation of the efforts of your ancestors. And that puts a big responsibility on you to keep going. Um, and it helps to let go, going back to letting go of the materialistic worldview. Once you abandon the idea that life is about accessing consistent joy, that liberates you to 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 set higher values, and you can give yourself permission to be miserable. You know what I mean? Like, you give yourself permission to get in that ice bath because you see value in the ice bath. And I think for a lot of people, like what you're describing on a small scale is being able to access a kind of perspective, a kind of existential wisdom that can only be conjured through intense discomfort or adversity.
Suffer and become.
Suffer and become. Now, I believe that deeply about the psychic confrontation with the darkness. I think that it is painful, just like going to the gym might be or an ice bath might be, but it enriches every other aspect of life. It deepens the experience of life in a way that makes you feel like you weren't living before. And you get to see a plane of reality that you can't access without dialing that frequency down. Woof, 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 woof. You know, like there's something that's fascinating, like a lot of Genghis Khan, he had a tribe of shaman that traveled with him. They were called the Dark-Had shaman, and they were dark shaman. They would force themselves into despondent states of depression because they believed very deeply that it granted them access to a kind of insight and knowledge and wisdom that cannot be accessed outside of that place. So it's like it's there's stuff. There's another line I'm attached to on the new album that says as I mine pain for its stones of insight, you know. So like leaning into this ritualistic discomfort to extract its knowledge, you know, what it has to tell you.